I'm Summer Lee, first Black woman elected as a state representative from Western Pennsylvania.
And I'm Bob Bland, leader in the fight against ideologues, demagogues, and abusers, plus co-founder and organizer of the Women's March on Washington.
I'm Matt McDermott, Democratic pollster, communication strategist, and tonight, one happy guy.
And I'm Tamika Mallory. In addition to fighting Trump, I also am fighting a terrible head cold. I'm also one of the co-organizers of the Women's March on Washington. And on tonight's special show, we're going to talk about a sweeping victory. At last, progressives win. The fight to take back our democracy begins now. We take the House, key governorships, and move closer to the Senate and the White House. Tonight, the head of America's only progressive party, an exclusive interview with Joshua Wronski. And beyond the Beltway, a leading expert on politics and American government, swing state scholar and West Virginia University professor Simon Haeder. So buckle up. Tonight we go inside the blue wave. So we did it. Not everything we wanted, and a few painful losses that were pretty significant. But I'm really happy to see so many women of color take home wins, including our very own Summer Lee. Congratulations again,
Thank
Summer.
you. Long time coming.
Yes, yes, but you're gonna be the best at it. We're 100% sure. And so, Matt, of course, we always turn to you to find out where are we, what happened, what's the numbers?
So I'm excited today, and we'll talk about some of the losses in a minute. But Democrats had a hugely successful night last night, a margin that we haven't seen in a midterm election in decades, and frankly, a margin that Republicans haven't seen in over 70 years. So I think we need to put that in context.
That's wonderful.
More voters voted for Democrats this year than have voted for Republicans in a midterm since the 1940s. So let's put that on the table first. And because of that, start with the good. Because of that, we saw the wins that we needed to see in the House. We're going to pick up somewhere around 35 seats in the House, which was more than enough to take back Congress. And because of that, we'll finally have a check and balance on this administration. We'll finally have some ability to get a deeper understanding of what's happening in our politics today. We'll have subpoena authority. We'll have the ability to investigate what needs to be investigated. And that's what voters were voting for last night. I think the other piece of good news we saw is that we won a large number of state legislatures and governorships around America and have the ability in critically important states now to manage the redistricting process heading into 2020 and redraw maps in a more fair and equitable way, in a way that we saw in Pennsylvania.
That's going to be critical for us. But, you know, a lot of people look at Pennsylvania for that, but only our congressional seats changed. Our legislature is still at play. We still have to make sure that we're taking back some more seats by 2020. We're looking at a hard road ahead of us if we are not able to get in there by the census.
And you said, you know, the Democrats, we can do this and all these great things that we should be doing. But do you feel confident that the Dems are going to go and really be serious and not be? I'm already hearing we got to reach across the aisle, and that's good. But are we back to that again?
My saving grace out of this election is that the electorate, folks at home, finally understand the structural disadvantages that Democrats face. It's finally a national conversation we can have about what's happening.
But it's good to know, but does that not leave us hopeless? Like, are we not resigned? Are we going to see voters who are saying, look at this barrier, you know, look, we came out, we organized, we resisted, we fought, and still this is what happens. You know, how do we keep them energized? How do we make sure we keep coming?
In Florida and Georgia,
we look at Florida.
You're going to have people who are going to say, two states, they're racist, we keep losing, voter suppression, they stole the election. I mean, Stacey Abrams, it's very clear that something is wrong there. And I talked to you about this earlier today. How do you win an amendment? Amendment 4, which restores 1.5 million voting rights to people who are formerly incarcerated, folks with felony convictions. You restore that, and I think it's like 5 million votes. But then you don't win the gubernatorial race, potentially. Maybe the numbers won't stick, right? But you don't win there. And that candidate is directly connected to the amendment. It doesn't make sense to me.
And that, for me, that's the lesson of 2018 is let me take the amendment first. How can we start pushing progressive policies at the initiative level, at the ballot initiative level, to pass progressive policies at the state level? And so we saw last night in Florida, to your point exactly, 1.5 million voters now are enfranchised in a way they've never been before. A majority of those are black men. Yep. So let's put this in perspective. If those voters had the right to vote 2 years ago, Andrew Gillum would have won.
Right.
So if we're able to mobilize and keep the energy alive and register those voters, we can win a Florida in 2 years from now.
Wow.
We need to start doing that in other states. We need to start enfranchising felon voters in states across America. We need to have automatic voter registration. We need to have same-day registration. We need to start passing progressive democratic reforms that get voters out to the polls and vote for the candidates that they believe in. And that's the lesson for me out of last night.
Yeah.
And Matt, before the election, everyone was saying that healthcare was the primary issue that was going to get people out to the polls. What did we see out of the exit polls?
Yeah, so great question. So healthcare was the number one issue last night by far. And by a 20-point margin, voters believed that the Democratic Party was going to stand up for them on healthcare versus Republicans, particularly when it comes to pre-existing conditions. So what does that mean? Voters didn't buy the BS. They didn't buy the BS from Republicans. We saw, at least in 3 states last night, that voters voted to expand Medicaid and Medicare for voters in those states, in places like Idaho, in places like Nebraska, giving millions of Americans access to health care they didn't have after years of Republicans trying to prevent it from happening. So look, voters are with us on health care, and I think our message was there. It's a question of how we want to continue to have that question answered moving forward nationally.
And I read that white evangelical Christians were 29% of the electorate on Tuesday. So my question is, between that and Trump having these rallies constantly and this hateful, divisive rhetoric, do we have any hope for the future?
I mean, really, because I hear you saying voters turned out, voters are with us, but then we look at these numbers, and again, we have to keep talking about it. When do we just say, okay, we give up on white women? I mean, how do we move here, understanding that yes, voters are understanding and sort of coming into the fold, but there are still major disparities in terms of a racial divide.
That's actually historical, because they aren't coming into the fold when it comes to white women in the South, because Brian Kemp's numbers were higher with white women than in 2016 with Trump's numbers. So there's actually more white women making the wrong decision when it comes to progressive values.
Well, you all have your work to do, work cut out for you.
I know, I'm really pissed today.
But we're all back about it, so I mean, do all of us, I mean, was our work in vain on that specific front?
On that issue, I mean, we have to see. So up next, a one-on-one with the head of the Progressive Party. You don't want to miss this. We are all progressives here, and our next guest is certainly carrying the torch. The Vermont Progressive Party is the only progressive party in America. Its roots with young Bernie Sanders, and now they're taking their message nationally. Its president, Joshua Wronski, is here with us, and now he joins us to have an exclusive interview to talk through what happened in our elections this week. Joshua, let's get right to it. What happened?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. Overall, it was fairly good results, although certainly not perfect by any means. It looks like Democrats have retaken control of the U.S. House and picked up around 34 seats. In the Senate, not so great news. It looks like Republicans have picked up 3 seats, so that's not great at all. Legislative races and the gubernatorial races, it's looking pretty good. We've flipped. It's looking like possibly 7 legislatures around the country and 7 gubernatorial races flipped to Democrats. So I think after the Trump administration is going to really have a lot more, is going to be challenged on a much higher level than previously, and that's a good thing for democracy.
So I'm wondering from you, maybe what were some of our failures in states like Vermont where we didn't win back governorships, and what should we be doing moving forward to make sure we're still elevating voices and diverse voices from progressive candidates?
Yeah, I think that was certainly a disappointing result in my home state of Vermont. Christine Halquist ran a very strong campaign based on progressive values, and it was disappointing that she did not defeat Governor Scott. I think in Vermont, it was really very much a local dynamic. Phil Scott is a very popular, fairly moderate Republican who recently passed the first gun legislation. He signed the first gun legislation we've had in Vermont in a very long time. So he signed and frankly lost a lot of Republican support over that, but gained some Democratic support. So he is seen as a more kind of moderate Republican here, and it has some Democratic support.
From the national level, when you were looking at electoral organizing by progressive campaigns, did we out-organize the Republicans, or was it the other way around?
Well, I think, you really have to look district by district. Certainly in some places, we did out-organize the Republicans, and I think the congressional races are a good indicator of that. And the fact that we picked up 8 gubernatorial seats, that's huge, and that's going to have a huge impact when we're going into like redistricting and things like that. And, in the Senate, we really didn't do very well, and, there's going to be a lot of commentary, I'm sure, on what exactly happened. We lost some very close races, all around the country. Democrats, saw several of their candidates unseated, which was unfortunate. We did manage to unseat one Republican in Nevada. You really have to look at that at a district by district level.
So Josh, I want to ask you a little bit about what's next. You mentioned redistricting a little bit already. I'm curious to get your perspective on perhaps some of the structural disadvantages that prevented Democrats from making bigger gains last night, and what we should be doing moving forward to ensure that we can counter what those disadvantages are.
Exactly. I think electoral reform is huge. I think going into this, the map was not very much in our favor, and we were kind of hindered by the fact that Republicans had control of the redistricting process last time around, and hopefully that will change next time we're able to do a more nonpartisan redistricting of congressional seats around the country. I think also you have to look at the voter suppression that was going on all around the country. I mean, especially in Georgia, where you had tens of thousands and more people being just purged from the voter rolls, and the kind of voter intimidation you were hearing from President Trump and others. And I think despite all of that, we still saw a massive voter turnout, and people were excited to go vote. And I'm very curious to see what ends up happening in Georgia with I'm sure there'll be lawsuits around the voter purges.
Josh, we mentioned some of the factors that contributed to the results. What do you think about the mail bombings from last week and the synagogue attack in my own hometown? Do you think that had any role at all?
I think it's part of a larger trend of people being, frankly, very afraid that we're moving towards a more authoritarian direction throughout the United States because of the Trump administration. I think the mail bombs and the synagogue attack, that was a huge piece of that. And I think, we saw record-breaking turnout for a midterm election, in part because of both the fear, frankly, and also people's excitement to vote for a record number of candidates who represent something new. I mean, beyond the fear, we also had, I think, we have the largest number of female candidates ever elected to Congress. You're an organizer on the ground, you're an activist on the ground, and I think part of our message as progressives moving forward after this election needs to be that the fight's not over, that there's still a lot of work and a lot of organizing that needs to be done on the ground. What is your message to those men and women out there who got involved after the 2016 election, made it through 2018, and are just sitting there on the couch this morning saying, oh my God, do I have the energy left to keep doing this? What's your message to them to keep the fight up? We just got to do it. And I would say, even if you were involved in a race that lost by a close margin, you never know how that is going to impact things in 2, 4, 6 years. Sometimes it takes running 2, 4, 6 times before you actually win. And that's what we have to do as organizers around the country. I mean, this is just one battle and a long fight to kind of restore American democracy and also achieve some level of economic and social and racial justice in this country. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that we have to engage in at the local, the statewide, and the federal level.
Let me ask you a quick question. You talk about restoring people's hope. And I wonder about these Fox News watchers, right? These conservative folks who are getting this information every day. We really feel like they're being brainwashed. And I just wonder if you feel like that also is playing a role.
Yeah, I think that is definitely playing a role. I think, Fox News is very good at playing into people's fears and uncertainty about their future, especially people who are hardest hit by kind of economic crises.
Right.
And they're very good at playing people off of each other. And I think as organizers, we need to kind of learn from that. And some of these people are never going to be winnable, but, we have to be able to go in and organize at the local level. And we're not going to do it over the airwaves. We're going to do it by knocking on doors, and we're going to do it by going out and passing minimum wage bills and passing ballot initiatives that really make people's lives better and organizing around those issues that can really impact people's lives locally. And that's, I feel strongly, that's the only way we're going to win over some of these people who, you're right, have been brainwashed.
I think you're 100% right, and we appreciate you for being with us today. You know, there's still a lot of work to be done, and there are a lot of folks who are saying we were organizing the day before, organizing on the day of, and we'll be organizing the day after. So thank you so much, Josh, for being with us today, and keep the fight going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Coming up, a scholar sums it all up. The definitive word on what happened and how history was changed. That's next. Tonight, we're honored to have with us one of America's leading experts on politics. From Swing State, West Virginia, Simon Haeder studies politics and what makes America tick, making sense of things that on the surface make no sense at all. Since day one, he's been watching election 2018, and now he joins us with some incredible, unique insight. Welcome, Simon. Give us a recap.
Well, I think pretty much what we expected. Democrats took the House. They did pretty well in some state races, but they had trouble with the Senate map.
So I want to ask you a little bit about some of the structural disadvantages that have affected Democrats, not only in this election, but in previous elections. You mentioned gerrymandering, and obviously there's a struggle ahead for Democrats in terms of redistricting heading into 2020.
Yeah, I think after the last census in 2010, Republicans made significant gain in state legislatures and governorships, and they were able to redistrict and redistrict very favorably, and we're still feeling the effects of those. Democrats should be doing a little better coming up with some gains in state legislatures and governorships that they just won.
So we know that all disadvantages aren't structural. What was turnout like? Did we have all the folk come out that we need? Did the black vote, were there enough of us en masse to really impact things this election?
And maybe you can tie that into this issue of governor races, right?
Yeah.
And we see in Florida and also in Georgia, there are clear issues there. So perhaps we can talk about turnout and voter suppression and these structural issues, you know, as it relates to those two races.
I think African Americans in particular and Hispanics did very well, but we have a structural disadvantage again in this country where certain areas have very few African Americans and certain areas have very few Hispanics. And that's basically rural America, and rural America is still predominantly white. And in those places like Missouri and West Virginia, my home state, it's very, very hard to turn things around for Democrats.
And tell me about the woman vote. We've said that this is 2018, the year of the woman. We just ushered in 100 new representatives, and it's a historic high for the House of Representatives. But what about the women voters? Tell me your analysis on that.
You're right. A tremendous year for women. Women turned out dramatically well for Democrats, particularly college-educated women. A little bit of an exception in the South, where even college-educated women are still trending a little bit Republican. But that's
is it all women, or is it just specifically white women, or like what? Have you looked at it broken down by who was voting? Because all women do not vote the same.
That's true. That's very, very true. We know that African American women disproportionately vote Democrat. Hispanic women disproportionately vote Democrat. We have a little bit of a difference here when it comes to white women. Again, college-educated women tremendously trending now towards Democrats, whereas white women without college degree are still trending somewhat Republican.
So let me ask you, if I'm a voter waking up the week after this election in Miami or in Orlando or frankly in Atlanta or Memphis or Chicago, and I'm seeing these disparities that exist, what should I be doing as an average voter, whether it's getting involved at the local level, whether it's supporting candidates, whatever it might be? What should we be doing as progressive, interested parties to help make these structural changes that we need to see?
Right.
I think the most important thing is to stay involved in politics and start running for local elections, because we know that's a stepping stone to larger elections later on. But we also know that to be successful these days, you need to be organized. You need to have a ground game, and that doesn't get developed in 1 year. That's a development that takes a couple of years. And if you want to be successful 2 years, 4 years down the road, today is the day to start.
So let me ask you, I mean, is Joe Manchin a case study for what Democrats should be doing moving forward nationally? Or should we accept the fact that Joe Manchin is a unique individual for a unique state, and let that be the end of that conversation.
Right.
I think probably more of the latter. He had a personal brand here in West Virginia that's very hard to replicate. But, you know, people can do it. You can see Montana might be sending a Democrat back to the Senate, and it's possible in some places.
So what do you see for 2020? What do you think is going to happen?
It's going to be very challenging in the Senate for Democrats going forward because of, you know, small rural populations still holding disproportionate sway. I think Democrats have a chance to gain more seats in the House, and I think if they develop a successful ground game and have a good nominee, they have a chance of gaining the presidency through places like Florida and the Midwest. The future of the Democratic Party is definitely more diverse, and I think they need to really think about this. We're not sure whether America is ready for a really diverse candidate again after President Obama, but definitely they need to think about either presidential or vice presidential candidate should be a woman, should be a minority, and they really should start thinking about this.
Yeah, but do you think that this number, I mean, we're seeing all types of numbers, and again, let's see how they stick. But over 70% of white women voting in Georgia against Stacey Abrams, you know, 50%, again, we continue to hear that number, voting for Ted Cruz. You know, how is that going to play out as we, you know, go towards 2020? It's actually pretty scary.
Yeah.
2020 will be a challenge, but demographics favor, in the long run, Democrats. You know, Texas will eventually turn blue when more and more Hispanics will gain the right to vote. Florida will eventually turn blue. That's very likely. Georgia, too. You know, urban places or states with urban populations, they're in play. Wyoming probably not going to be in play, and so Democrats should really focus on those places where they have a chance to win.
That's very, very, very important, but they're going to have to focus with a different strategy because the strategies that they have previously used are to, again, target white voters, to target some of the same people. They are not looking at the fact that black women particularly are voting in numbers that, you know, we need. I mean, they're voting on behalf of Democrats, really, and sweeping these elections, and there's no real resources going into those communities.
Let me add this, though. Many policies that are good for urban African-American women are also good for rural white women.
Absolutely.
And I think
Absolutely.
That's right.
100%.
I think Democrats need to do a better job at messaging and reaching those people as well and bring them into the tent if they can.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. And you know, we had a lot of questions for you because you're a mastermind. We're going to be picking your brain again and getting this good information. Thank you so much for what you shared with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Coming up, we'll wrap it up and we'll make important predictions about what's to come. Predictions for the future of our democracy. That's next. So where do we go from here, everyone? Like, what do we see happening in our future? We're coming up against another election, 2020, and there's a lot of organizing that has to start right now.
So let's ask our newly elected leader in the Pennsylvania State Legislature, what are our new elected Democrats going to be doing at the state level to start moving the conversation in a progressive way?
Well, honestly, I think we've already done a lot of that. I think if you look at right now and you look at where a lot of us started a year ago when folk were announcing, you will see that conversations have already shifted, that the narrative has already started to change. We're talking about healthcare in a way that is more universal. So I think that that's a positive. I think really what needs to happen is not so much just the legislatures, still the organizers. We still represent people who have a lot of power and they have a lot of say. We have to make sure that the people are behind us, that they are vocal, that they're showing up at state houses, because a legislator can still do a lot. Even if we have a lot of progressives, we can get a lot done and maybe start to try to move some things. But if the people aren't behind us, then Republicans will just keep considering that they can just keep doing what they want to do.
And that's right. Movements are not a point in time. And so we took back a lot of state legislatures over the last week. We need to start activating our voters to get progressive policy agendas done. Places like Colorado and places like New York and places like Nevada, where we can pass voter reforms that will help us in elections
moving forward. Which is the first thing that we need to do in so many of these states, because there are so many people who we're seeing couldn't vote, didn't feel like their vote would matter even if they did.
Had to wait in lines for 4 hours, 5 hours.
4.5 hours.
Even here in New York.
Yeah, when we're seeing electronic voting machines breaking down, we need protections, and we can do that at the state level. I think that is something that the Democrats, especially progressives, can absolutely take up.
And it's small changes that will literally make a huge difference in how we go about voting and how we turn out our voters moving forward.
Those little victories keep people engaged. we get big losses, we get big wins. But sometimes when you see that little local thing move, when you see that person who you backed, when you see that initiative that you cared about become successful, it makes you keep going. It shows you that we are moving in the right direction, and we are on the right side of history with some of these things.
And we also had a lot of youth voter engagement yesterday, so we have to make sure to also be, for youth and for people who previously weren't engaged in the system, actually still educating them on how the system works, what the issues are, so that they can use their voices properly, and that's going to take several years.
So let's talk Trump. We have a newly elected Democratic Congress.
Haven't we been talking Trump?
That's all we talked about. So we have a newly elected Democratic House. Should they be working with the president moving forward?
What do you guys think?
I think if we send you to Washington, we're expecting you to go and do your job, whatever that means. But I think some of the challenges we see is working with someone, sort of conceding to their ideology. That we shouldn't see. We should see a fight coming out of Washington.
Exactly. And I think that's the shift we need to make. I think we have to stop framing it as, are we going to concede? Are we going to work with them? No, we're going to do whatever we need to do for our people, for our constituents. And maybe sometimes that means we work with someone else. We reach across the aisle. Maybe sometimes that means we have to stand our ground. But we have to start looking at it as we're going to employ whatever tactics we have.
Whatever it is.
And even hold people from our own party accountable, because there's a whole new cohort of folks coming in. 60% of the new people who are coming into the House of Representatives didn't take any corporate money. So they're only accountable to their constituents. It's going to make a huge difference.
And if we've learned anything over the last 2 years, and even in this election, it should be to our Democratic leaders that our values are not negotiable. We cannot have a debate over our values. We can have a debate over policy and how those policy outcomes reflect our values, but our values are enshrined in ourselves and our parties.
That's right. Well, thank you very much. Listen, there's a lot to be discussed and a lot that's happening in our country. On a closing note, I'd like to remind everyone that this is our last show. Look how far we've come with just 6 shows. I mean, wow. Power to the progressives. Summer, good luck in the legislature. We believe in you. And Matt, keep writing for us. We're going to be watching and ensuring that those Washington Post pieces get tweeted all over so people are educated and know what's going on. And for Bob and myself, we'll be heading to Washington, D.C. for the next Women's March on January 19th, and we hope folks will join us there. You can visit womensmarch.com for more information. We won the battle, but not the war. The war still goes on. And for all of us here, good night, America.